So let me start by welcoming. Let me just say welcome to you. Welcome, Dr. Kulvi Kaur. Dr. Kulvi Kaur is in San Diego now, but hails from England and has a really, really brilliant TED Talk. I really highly recommend that you look at it. You can learn more about her work there. Today, we're going to be talking about epigenetics, and we're going to be talking about, I'm hoping that we will talk about trauma through the generations and resiliency. And I also am really curious to hear more about meditation and its impact, and as well as compassion and compassion practices on its impact. I met Dr. Kulvi a couple of years back at a meditation at a yoga center in the San Diego region. Ever since, we've been hoping to get together. I've been very much looking forward to having lunch. I've been really struck by how Dr. Kulvi is not only a brilliant scientist, but she has such a big heart, and you can see it through her TED Talk. You will definitely see it today as she speaks. The way she languages, the way she responds, it's like she's got that bicameral, bilobal heart-head, both very, very strong and very, very cultivated. So I'm really excited to share Dr. Kulvi Kaur with you today. And I'm going to ask you, Dr. Kulvi, would you mind just starting by letting us know who you are and telling us a bit about your studies and your education?
Thank you so much, Laura. It's just such a joy to be here. And it really means a lot to me that you speak about the heart connection, because I actually very rarely start a speaking engagement these days without first connecting my audience to their heart space. We go through a heart-mind coherence meditation, actually. And that's because for me, I have a pretty respected education. I have lots of letters after my name. I did all of my studies at the University of Oxford in the UK, and then I was invited to the US on this crazy visa called Aliens of Extraordinary Abilities. And I've been very fortunate in my educational background. I have a master's and a PhD and a bachelor's from Oxford. My research has always been in applying genomic technologies and genetic technologies to wellness. So I've applied the new information that we get from the human genome, which was sequenced right at the beginning of the time when I graduated, to supporting physicians and supporting them in making better decisions for their patients. So I was recruited here for my work in cancer and also for my work in fertility. And it's been quite the journey. One of the things that I found is that none of those letters after my name can mean anything at all unless I can assimilate that information that I was fortunate enough to acquire at Oxford through the heart space. It's useful, maybe. I don't know what I would call being able to offer information and facts around the dinner table, but I've always felt that if we want to affect real change in the world, we really have to take that information and apply and turn it into wisdom. And that, for me, at least in my experience, can only be done if we can take that information and move into a heart space to assimilate it and to spread it. And that's how we affect change in the world. I often tell a little story, actually, about two particularly interesting individuals. One of them was a Nobel Prize laureate. His name's Donald Glaser. He won the Nobel Prize back in 1956 at a very young age. He was a physicist, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize for discovering that our particles, he developed something called a bubble chamber, and he discovered that our subatomic particles are coming in and out of existence so rapidly that we appear solid. And it's such an interesting story, because not long after he was awarded his Nobel Prize, he actually he passed away, and many people haven't actually heard of him. And then you contrast that with an individual who 2,500 years prior is also very well known today. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, and he came up with this idea that, well, he actually stated when he came out of a meditation one day that our subatomic particles are coming in and out of existence at a rate of trillions of times per second. And what I often feel is that these two individuals came to exactly the same conclusion, this mind-blowing conclusion that we are coming in and out of existence so rapidly that we appear solid. One of them came to that understanding from a heart space, and another one came to that understanding from a head space. And one of those individuals went on to affect huge change in the world, to really change the course of human history.
Mm.
So I think that really being a heart-centered scientist is just so important to me.
What a beautiful and extraordinary and stark contrast.
It really is. And this exactly the same conclusion, though. Famous for winning a Nobel Prize, famous for creating Buddhism or inventing Buddhism. They had this, they came to the same conclusion.
I'm surprised to hear it, because I haven't heard from either. I haven't heard this particular science from either. I didn't know Buddha came up with that.
Yeah, he said we
Exited, yeah.
are appearing and disappearing at a rate of trillions of times per second. And Donald Glaser said we're appearing and disappearing at a rate of 23, 1 times 10 to the 23, so 1 with 23 zeros after it times per second at our subatomic level.
That is extraordinary. And it's a question that I get when you talk about how we are, everything is energy. People will say, well, then how do you speak about the fact that when I bump my knee, it hurts, right? I bumped my knee, a solid thing against a solid thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet, I often like to think of it as a ceiling fan. If a ceiling fan is turning very, very quickly, it can actually appear solid, but there's way more space in that ceiling fan. When it comes to a space of stillness, you actually get to see the space between. And it's that appearing and disappearing so rapidly that actually causes it to appear solid.
So brilliant. That's a great illustration as well. So I have two things. One is, I would love if we could, later in our conversation, perhaps have you take us into one of those head-heart coherence exercises.
Yeah, absolutely.
But meanwhile, I wonder if you could tell us what has got your attention right now. What are you working on? What is exciting in your world?
Well, it's actually a real honor to be here on Veterans Day. Yesterday, I got the results of a study that I started at the beginning of this year, where we had a cohort of 34 veterans, and they're a particularly interesting subset of individuals because we know they have a specific gene expression. Gene expression is which genes are switched on. And so our genes, very few of us really understand that actually our genes are not set in stone. Our genetics really change in response to our environment. The science of how our genes change in response to our environment is called epigenetics. And you can think of an environment as being a thought, as being a friend, as being a word, as being a food, as being your media consumption, as being your time in nature. There are so many things that are an environment. And so our genes are constantly turning on and off to try and bring us to a state of equilibrium in response to our environment. So they're constantly turning on and off, up regulating a little bit, down regulating a little bit. And in the case of veterans, actually, they have a specific gene expression, and then they go away and come and experience a very, very traumatic situation, and then they come back to that original space, but their gene expression has actually changed by the point that they're coming back. So oftentimes veterans have real issues assimilating back into society because their genes or their loved ones at home actually expect them to be the same person that left when they come back. But at a fundamental, at a cellular level, they have shifted. And so we had a cohort of 34 veterans. All of them had been diagnosed with PTSD. And we looked at their epigenetic profile, and then we gave them specific exercises and meditations and nutraceuticals and techniques that would help to reset their genetics, to help them reset their epigenetic profile. And I was in tears looking at the results yesterday. It was just so phenomenal to me that we could have these 34 individuals. At the actual statistics of how much their quality of life metrics, I mean, I was intrigued by that, but some of the testimonials, one of my favorite was a wife saying that she'd heard her partner laugh for the first time. And that one was the one that meant so much to me, actually, that she had heard her partner laugh for the first time in many years. And yeah, it's very, very powerful to know that number one, our genes are shifting constantly. We can become very selective about the environments we select when we understand that those environments changes on a cellular level, but then also that actually there are modalities, there are people, there are environments that can bring us back to a more balanced way of being. And we're seeing that so much in the world right now with the environmental stimulus of we have so many to choose from that are particularly challenging for many individuals. And so thinking about what's the story we're telling ourselves at the moment as we move through these environmental stimuli, and can we have ourselves express a more empowered way of being if we can support them in knowing that this is it's a story. We all have a story to tell for ourselves.
So that's extraordinary. So that just leads to so many more questions. If we can empower the cells, what are you finding to be the most effective method? You talked about meditation and nutraceuticals. How do you know one is working better than the other? And what I'm also curious to know about the nutraceuticals that are being used.
One of the most beautiful things I think about the human condition is that we're all unique, and what works for one individual might not necessarily be the best thing for another. One of the cool things about the science of epigenetics is actually we get to empirically measure that this is the thing that resonates with your soul. Sometimes it can be prescribing, take a walk in nature with your dog for 10 minutes per day. This is your gene expression today. We can see that this particular gene that we would like to be at 50% switched on is actually switched on 20%. Why don't you every single morning for the next 7 days, take your pet for a walk in nature for 30 minutes, and then in 7 days' time, come back to us, and we will look at what the expression of that gene is in 7 days. And if that thing has brought them joy, has made them feel love, has resonated with their soul, their gene expression will follow suit. It's actual empirical evidence, and the ancient wisdom practices know this. They live this. They don't need a readout from an instrument to tell them that their brain-derived neurotropic factor is expressing at 50% gene expression, and on day 7 it's expressing at 70%. So I often, for me, it's what brings me to that stillness where I can feel that my particles are coming in and out of existence at trillions of times per second, or a thing that brings me to that space of joy and love. And I don't want to oversimplify, and yet we've just had a beautiful study of 34 veterans experiencing PTSD that where it was that simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. I think that we might have a tendency as humans to want to find complex answers to our state of being, and yet we're really the space between that first inhale and that final exhale. And in that space, I genuinely believe there's nothing that we can't do. And that goes from changing ourselves at a cellular level to also changing the universe, because I mean, I don't want to go into too much of the quantum theory, but spooky action at a distance tells us that when our subatomic particles change, the subatomic particle at the other end of the universe can also shift.
Wow, amen to that. I love how you describe your own feeling of aliveness. I might call it a hum. You have strung together 5 or 6 scientific words. So is it fair to say that you've mapped maybe the different practices, the different types of meditation, even going out into nature?
Yeah, there's actually some really beautiful studies looking at many of those. One of my absolute favorites came out of the Baylor College of Medicine, and they took 30 office workers. Actually, they took 30 office workers and took a pinprick of blood from them, And then they asked them to sit down for 15 minutes. And their instructions to these individuals was to ignore intrusive thoughts, breathe deeply, and listen to a mantra. And after 15 minutes, they took a second pinprick of blood and they mapped which genes were switched on and which genes were switched off at the beginning of that time and at the end of that time. And the image is just stunning. They show genes that are switched on in green and genes that are switched off in red. And the genes at the beginning of that time, at time one, are genes involved in stress response and aging, and then the genes at the end of that 15 minutes, after just 15 minutes, the opposite pattern is seen. The genes that are involved in longevity and energy production and metabolism have all switched on, and those genes that are involved in fight or flight have switched off. So what's pretty interesting about this field of study is that it's very underfunded and very sporadic. There aren't many good peer-reviewed, well, the peer-reviewed studies that are published in this field of study have to, the burden of data and the burden of evidence on them is double or triple a different publication, because they are presenting something quite revolutionary. They're presenting that you can look at the expression of somebody's genes, and then 15 minutes later, you can look at their genes again and see how much they've changed in response to this simple practice of ignoring intrusive thoughts, breathing, and repeating a mantra. So yeah, I think most of the mapping has been done in response to yoga and meditation. And then it's a little bit more, walking your dog on the beach is also a meditation. Or can be. Sitting here talking to you today is a meditation. Our genes are constantly responding to the environment. So these small micro changes in our sense of joy, in our sense of peace, in our sense of love can really impact us on a cellular level very deeply. And that we're starting to see and starting to document very, very clearly. And again, as I said, the ancient wisdom yogis just knew this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what you say is so important. I think we can all know that we feel better if we do these practices. So we don't necessarily need science to tell us that I feel better because I've been meditating every morning now for a week or a month or a year. But what I think is also interesting about what you're saying is that I think we still think that our genes are somewhat fixed. Yeah. And you're talking about in 15 minutes, you will see a change. But then that suggests that in 15 minutes, if I'm angry or upset, I might also see a change in that direction.
Absolutely. And I think, we're taught that at school. I think we're taught as young children that you inherit your genes from your mom and you inherit your genes from your dad, and that's what gives you your blue eyes and your curly hair and your nose and your face shape. And this idea that our genes are responding to our environment is actually relatively new, but irrefutable. It's been shown over and over and over and over again.
You know, I love this because I feel that you're really affirming what I experienced through Ayurveda. I feel like what I'm hearing is that we are always in a relationship, that everything is a relationship, that we are always in relationship to nature. And you're saying even down to the genetic level, we are relating to our world. And
yeah, 100%. I actually had a lot of fun with the veteran cohort, looking at their genes and trying to understand if I could establish. I would have loved to have had a dosha questionnaire in this study, because there are particular genetic profiles that seem to me to correlate very strongly with a given dosha. Our genetic profiles, the static ones, can tell us what levels of a particular metabolic enzyme you have, or how rapidly you clear toxins from the body, or how rapidly you metabolize specific foods to give you specific energies. It's so deeply interweaved and interconnected with the ideas of the doshas in Ayurveda.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there is research out of India that the doshas are there in the genes, that there is a mapping to the genetic code, which is fascinating.
Yeah, it's actually, you mentioned the nutraceuticals, it actually, it very much maps back to that. You can definitely see that specific doshas definitely need specific nutraceuticals, and that can either be determined by their genetic profile or their doshas.
So the nutraceuticals that you were giving to this cohort, were those to support what? Yeah, could you just tell us about that? I mean, I guess.
So actually, many of them, we looked at the genes that that encoded their neurotransmitters. Many of them had PTSD, so we looked at their baseline levels of how well they broke down dopamine, how well they broke down epinephrine and norepinephrine and serotonin. We looked at how well they were able to break down sulfur-based nutrition. We looked at how well they were able to methylate specific foods, and methylate means turn that food into a state in which the body can assimilate it and turn it into energy. And so we looked at all of these different factors in their genetic profile and then gave them nutraceuticals that balanced out their baseline genetics. A good example would be a gene called COMT. Individuals who have low levels of this particular enzyme that the gene encodes need magnesium, because magnesium is really what supports the function of that gene. It's a magnesium dependent enzyme. So it really is it's bringing the baseline of the body back into balance, taking what's been thrown out of whack by us not necessarily having the nutrition that we need in our food anymore. Historically, our food had all of the nutrients that we might need, but with the depletion of the soil and with our more restricted diets these days, or for some individuals, it's very difficult to attain those nutrients in the diet. And when you have an enzyme that might be struggling because you're genetically predisposed to that enzyme struggling, then it can be very helpful. I think the largest actually quality of life metric that we saw improvement in over the whole cohort was digestion.
Interesting. I was thinking, as you're describing it, I would love to be there really watching and taking notes on these tests, this research that you're doing. I love how individualized and personalized it is.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think actually that's where we've failed individuals up until now. These I often think that the major difference between you being able to go to your physician prescribing you Ayurveda or prescribing you meditation or prescribing you acupuncture, the only difference is that there hasn't been a bunch of scientists sit around and say we're making a placebo-controlled double-blinded study on this. And yet that placebo, in my personal opinion, and this is just my opinion, it strips you of your individuality. It takes you and turns you into a statistic. And everybody misses out in that way, because those individuals who do respond to a certain treatment intervention don't necessarily get that treatment because an individual who didn't respond to that treatment intervention cancelled out the effect. So I really do hope, and I see this, I believe that when we know better, we do better. At least that's my hope. And the field, I hope, is moving into a space where we can really honor the individual. And either way, this field that of ancient wisdom medicine really does honor the individual and really does take that into consideration. So I like to think that hopefully one day allopathic medicine will catch up with these ancient wisdom technologies.
Seems like it. It seems like the idea of personalized medicine is really spreading.
Yeah.
Have you heard of a man named Dr. William Walsh? He wrote a book called Nutrient Power: How to Heal Your Biochemistry to Heal Your Brain.
Oh, fascinating. No, I'll have to look him up.
He did research, I think thousands, maybe even 10,000 clients, patients, people he was studying who have schizophrenia, serious psychological disorders, many of them in prisons. And he found that what you're talking about, if they could give them more copper, or they could give them more zinc, if they because they weren't metabolizing well, they could actually return them to baseline mental health. It was extraordinary. And so here these people are imprisoned. He also found that there are certain sort of genetic traces in certain cultures that predispose them towards alcoholism.
Yeah.
And again, he was switching up the nutraceuticals, the nutrition they were having, high doses of nutrition. So it's not like we can just eat more bananas, let's say, or eat, but at the same time, he was changing people's lives. It's just extraordinary.
Yeah, the data is there, the evidence is there. It's, the large scale application, I think, is what we as a human race are moving into as we move through this transitional time, that this shift of the ages, I really do hope will bring forth more of that way of being for us, because it's a way of being that's so much more in touch with the earth and in touch with nature and in touch with the divine feminine energies and with our wisdom. It's a much more heart-centered way of doing this journey of life.
That's really beautiful. I think that seems like a good time, a good segue, a good introduction to a heart-head coherence experience.
Oh, I would love
lead us. All right, beautiful.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to do that. Thank you for being here. It's lovely to see your beautiful faces on the call. I will take about 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Perfect. And I just wanted to say, my friend, mentor, teacher, Dr. Jeffrey Armstrong is also with us. And I did want to cut to him afterwards, because I'm sure he'd have some beautiful things to say and maybe some questions for you as well. So I hope he'll stay with us for that.
Very, very inspired by your Veda talk. Like so much of what I share is so deeply based in what you were sharing that day. It really, really moved me. Thank you. I might invite you all to just take a comfortable seat. Maybe find a little bit more space in the spine. Maybe find a little bit of relaxation in the shoulders. If it feels comfortable to you, just gently closing the eyes down and consciously connecting to the breath. Connecting to the breath in recognition that that's the distinction between your solid and your energetic form. That place that exists between the inhale and the exhale, between your existence and your energy, between the solidness of your matter and your omnipresence. As you connect deeply to the breath, bringing your attention to the heart space. Some people can sometimes find it helpful to gently touch the heart space here. But whatever you need to bring your attention fully and deeply to the space inside of you where your heart resides. Breathing as if you could breathe in and out of the heart. And with your attention fully focused at the heart, giving yourself permission to visit your neural anatomy, visiting your memory banks, your brain, and locating a memory of a time in your life when you felt absolute joy, when you felt so joyful about someone or something, about an event, the joy of waking up in the morning, when you felt a joy so unadulterated that it overtook your entire being, that childlike joy. Recalling those memories of joy as you maintain your attention deeply at the heart space. And breathing here. breathing long and slow and deep, recalling those memories of joy, your attention fully at the heart. Maintaining your attention at the heart, recalling those memories of joy. And as you breathe in and out, as if you could breathe through your heart. One more time, visiting those memory banks, and recalling a memory of a time in your life when you felt deep compassion. Compassion for a child, compassion for the earth, compassion for the mother. When you felt deep compassion for self, compassion for a stranger, invoking those memories of compassion with your attention fully at the heart space. Breathing here. Fully connected to the breath. Invoking those memories of compassion. Connected to the heart of the universe as it beats inside of you in this moment. Held by the earth, connected to the sky, the space between the inhale and the exhale. As one last time you revisit your neural anatomy and locate a memory of a time in your life when you felt unconditional love. The kind of love that changes the trajectory of your human experience. A love so pure that it knows no boundaries. The creative force of all existence. The love that compelled you to come back and occupy a human vessel and guide us through this time on earth. Feeling that memory of love. Your attention fully focused at the heart. That love that will carry Mother Earth and every single one of her sentient beings onwards in this lifetime. Breathing into that love. Your attention fully at the heart center. The final few moments here. when you feel so inclined, just very gently, with deep compassion, remaining in that space of love, blinking the eyes open. I truly mean it when I say that this is the space where we affect change in the world. This is the space from which we can move forward. This is the space from which we can carry Mother Earth and all of her sentient beings onwards. This is why we came back. Thank you so much.
That's such a powerful message, and boy, do we forget. It's powerful. It's so affirming. Thank you. Such a
Thank you.
beautiful reminder. So I have a number of questions. Jeffrey, would you like to come in with a question, or shall I keep going and I'll bring you in a minute? You're on mute. There we go.
Aside from saying how beautiful Kulvi's presentation is and profound, which is a hard thing to find in a presentation, both of those, I'd like to hear from you and be a listener most of this. Enjoying it very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll come back. We will have time for questions too. So I love what you're saying about the heart. I recently lost a friend. She passed away to cancer of the blood. When another friend, a mutual friend, said, "How can it be?" She was an acupuncturist, Chinese medicine. She was healthy. She meditated, was out in nature every day, ate well, etc. How can it be? She died young. Well, she was 60, but feels young to me. I said, I don't know, maybe loneliness. Could you speak to that, to how from the genetic level, how our psychological experiences connect to physical wellness or lack of?
Absolutely. So sorry for your friend. I truly believe that on our soul's journey, we select the vessel that's going to give us the best lesson or the best evolution or the best opportunity to heal or the best opportunity to serve or the best opportunity to give in this lifetime. And that vessel carries certain stories, we speak a little bit about ancestral stories that our cells carry. From my personal experience, I feel that I chose this particular vessel because she's the Oxford graduate academic that had to balance out her ancestral story of being an outcast of the Indian untouchable slave ancestral story. And so for probably most of my life, I couldn't speak. I didn't feel safe to speak because the story that my cells were telling me was that it wasn't safe to speak. And so I've gone off topic with your.
No, please. It's beautiful what you're saying.
Loneliness, I think, is the soul, the story that her soul potentially was craving for her evolution and for her healing and for her capacity to serve. It sounds like she served so beautifully. And we have free will. We know that we get to choose how we move through the expression of our life. We influence the expression of our genes. We also influence the expression of our lives. And without a shadow of a doubt, we know this, we see it. These stories that our cells carry, they impact us, they impact our future generations. They have been created in our past generations. I also adore the idea in physics that there's no such thing as time and that all of existence is happening at a single pinpoint moment in the present. And I can't get my head around it. I like to sometimes think about this construct of time as being something that helps me to acclimatize to being in a human vessel. And yet, yeah, I mean, loneliness is debilitating. It's when we go through that heart-brain coherence exercise, we recall those, invoke those memories of times when we felt emotions that were really, that bring us closer to our omnipresence, that bring us closer to our state of energy, that bring us closer to our truth. And then, of course, there are states of being that take us further and further away from our omnipresence and further away from our truth. And all of that, the construction of the human vessel is just mind-bogglingly beautiful. It's unfathomable how incredibly engineered this body is, so that we can look down a microscope and see the expression of our joy, and equally we can look down a microscope and see the expression of our sadness, or what's bringing us closer to our wholeness and what's bringing us further away from our wholeness. And yeah, specific ways of being or specific life experiences definitely do take us away from that space of wholeness. And you know what's beautiful though about what you're saying and is coming to be now, when in Hindi, in the Hindi language, when you die, the actual expression is you became pura, and pura is the word for wholeness. It's she became whole.
Yeah. Oh, you're going to make me teary. Thank you. She definitely became whole. I love that. Thank you. I would love, if you feel comfortable, I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about the ancestral stories. And yeah, just in the context of what you're sharing with us, to talk more about that. I find it fascinating what you, not only your idea that you came here and you're this celebrated and extraordinary scientist, but what that means for generations to come as well.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. It's probably the reason I became so interested in epigenetics. I couldn't understand the expression of my life. I had these findings in the lab. That I wanted to share, and I'd be invited to share them, and I couldn't speak. My throat would close up. All I would have to say was that I'm Dr. Kaur, I'm the lead scientist, and I would stand in front of the mirror the night before a meeting and I would recite over, I'm Dr. Kulvi Kaur, I'm the lead scientist on this project. I would get into that room, and it was debilitating, to the point at which my supervisor said to me, this is embarrassing. We have some of the world's greatest scientists coming to hear you talk about these amazing findings, and we can't have this. So I couldn't take credit for my work. And I came across a really interesting study that really spoke to this, about how our fear was encoded in our genes and passed down through the generations. And so it's really got me thinking. The study actually showed, it was a study that was conducted in mice. It was a study out of a university in Atlanta. They went down to downtown Atlanta and they walked around and they saw what they called an inevitable cycle of poverty and violence and addiction. And they were shocked at this thought that you could call poverty, violence, and addiction inevitable. They went back to the lab and they conducted this study where they took a mouse and they conditioned the mouse to be afraid of a specific scent by giving the mouse a small electric shock when they exposed the mouse to scent. And we know that you can get conditioned to a particular environmental stimulus so that you subconsciously or unconsciously respond to that stimulus. So that's exactly what was happening in these mice. And then they bred from that original mouse over multiple generations. And every single one of the descendants of that original mice were petrified of this scent, even in the absence of the stimulus of that electric shock. What they concluded in this study was that the grandparents of that mouse needed to pass on a story to its descendants to let them know that this scent was something to be feared. And it really gets me thinking, what is the story that my grandparents needed me to know? My grandparents needed me to know that it wasn't safe to be seen and heard as a female Indian untouchable. And yet what they hadn't taken into consideration was that my environment would be completely different. So my environment was coded to be afraid. And so one of the things I love about overcoming this or transcending this is that when we come into a place of stillness in meditation, we come acutely present in our environment. When we're walking and being with nature or being with a pet or being in love or being in compassion, we're becoming acutely present. And in that acute presence, the story that is encoded in our cells can no longer exist there, because that cell is still trying to respond to the environment, but the environment of the thought that it's not safe for me to be here is now slowly dissolving away. And so when we talk about how can compassion shift your genes, it's actually really how can being so acutely present in this moment that you're acting from a space of love or a space of joy or a space of heart, so that those stories that your grandparents needed you to know to keep you safe don't have to play out anymore, because they're not a true reflection of your environment. I was completely safe in that environment. I was amongst great scientists who were desperate to hear about the latest findings that it had. They wanted nothing but to hear from me. I was safe, but my story that I was told was that it wasn't okay for me to speak in that moment. And it's gradual. It doesn't happen overnight. I still get nervous. One of the things I like to share is that when you observe yourself responding to a particular, reacting to a particular environmental stimulus from a place that isn't a true reflection of your current environment, wiggle your big toe. Do something different to break that spell. Do something different. It can be minor, just to show you that actually you're here right now. You're not in that space where you were being given a small electric shock in response to that scent. And I mean, your ancestors wanted to keep you safe. I mean, that's the bottom line. They needed to keep you safe. There are some beautiful studies from the Netherlands that look at children who were in the womb during the time of the Great Famine there, and their bodies, to try and keep them safe, they have a gene expression that enables them to, or causes them to deposit fat more effectively, because the story that their mothers needed them to know while they were gestating in the womb was that food was scarce. Overcoming that in the present moment is a real art and a real beautiful journey to healing, I think.
I love listening to you. Not only are you so intelligent and so full of love and compassion, but you make it so accessible. You make a really complex science very accessible.
It's interesting. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
The study that I mentioned earlier about the gene expression changes, the title of that study I read, and it was something like, I can't even remember, it's like temporal transcriptome changes in gene expression in response to modulating metabolic inhibit, and it was 10 lines long. And I looked at it and I thought, I'm not interested in this. I don't even understand the title. And yet, when I read the paper, I realized that what they were telling me was that our genes change in response to our environment. I think there's a reason why the language oftentimes is made complicated. I really genuinely think that actually the science is simple. And I love that Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply enough, it just means that you don't understand it well enough.
Yeah.
I love making it's an accessible science because it's part of our souls, it's part of our wisdom, it's part of our truth. And I think those things are really available to us. And we can put as many long, complicated Latin multisyllabic words on it as we like. But when we're expressing our truth and our joy and our love, I think it's the feeling that comes across as much as the words.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, you do it well. Just to affirm before we go to questions, the ancestral story, it's beautiful how you put your grandparents were wanting to keep you safe. Yet it feels like in modern times, it's quite a disempowering story. Yeah. You have found not just healing and wholeness, but a real power through what you've learned and how you practice. Are you saying that were you now to have children, those children would no longer have that story in their genes?
Absolutely, 100%. I believe that to be true with every fiber of my being, and actually I know it to be true. And I also have experienced and genuinely feel that when we heal, we also heal our past generations and our future generations. We can call it spooky action at a distance, we can call it quantum mechanics, we can call it love, we can call it goddess, we can call it whatever we want. But I think, sometimes I share this and individuals who've already had children get thinking, I wish I knew this before. And yet our healing is the universe's healing.
Yeah, I love that. I think at the very least, we want to think that our children won't have to suffer, that we can do this work, at least for them, and hopefully for the generations to come. But I love how I feel like it's a river, so we're thinking downstream, but we're also expanding out to all beings alive everywhere now. So that feels like it's very motivating to stay with our practice because we do it for all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Love daily sadhana.
Yeah, beautiful. So let's see if there's any questions. We've got young Santiago, Emily, Parva. Parva, yeah, go ahead.
I've got a few questions actually. Thanks for this session. I enjoyed it. You mentioned how people come back with PTSD and so their gene expression has changed. But what I'm curious about is that why do they choose military? Was their gene expression different to begin with that made them choose versus me who will not choose it? Yeah.
So, well, my first answer to your question is probably my favorite answer of any answer I can ever give. And it's not a cop-out. It's really genuinely the truth. And that's that I don't know. And the reason I love those three words is because they open up a whole universe of possibility. I fully actually resonate with what you're saying. And it's such a deep topic. My personal heart feeling is that I have particular experiences or gene expressions or life journeys that cause me to make a particular decision, and yet and so that would be the aspect of me that doesn't have free will. And yet in a present moment, I take an action from my truth, from my soul, from my omnipresence. That would be the aspect of me that does have free will. And so I really, it's a huge philosophical idea, and I loved how you expressed it. It's so beautiful. And I'm so familiar with some of the ancient wisdom teachings that you spoke of, that I would love to learn more about from you, actually. But yeah, I think that my will is willing me to come home to myself. And there are particular points in my life where my journey could have looked very, very different, and yet my will is what brought me to this space so that my life looks like this right now. And you're right, in the context of your question about the veterans, I don't want it to go into the mechanics so much, but there are definite gene expressions, especially in our neural transmitters, where, I mean, they have a specific gene that's called the worrier or the warrior, a WO or WA gene. And one of the things that I observed in this particular cohort, and I don't like making generalizations, but in this particular 34 individuals that we looked at for this study, many of them, they had a higher proportion of the warrior, the WA baseline genetics. That's how their brain breaks down dopamine and adrenaline and epinephrine and all of these chemicals in their brains, that they had a higher proportion, there were a high proportion of individuals who broke those particular molecules down more slowly than in the general population. So I think there probably is a particular propensity that's recorded in our genetics to take a given path in life.
Interesting. So it's almost like their fate is sort of, I don't want to say predetermined, but it seems like they would choose what could give them sort of more grief. And it's not just them, right? It's all of us. You know, we're not aware of it until it happens to us. The choices we think we are making because we are driven by, and this sort of ties to the prisoner data that you presented also, where people don't know what's going on and they act on certain impulse or force. Interesting. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you.
I have to go, but I'm going to leave time for others.
You have the free will to do so. No, it's great. It's a great question, and I'm so moved by what you said, Kulvi, because in Jyotish we can see a warrior pattern in a person, or we can see, you know, a more spiritual. We can see that through looking at the Jyotish, and that again would be a fascinating study to see how the genes line up with what we're able to see from the stars.
Yes,
fascinating. And also, I've always been moved by Sri Aurobindo's comment that we're alive to creatively and consciously participate in the creative unfolding of consciousness.
Yes.
Maybe our free will comes from an awareness of awareness. Maybe until then that we're not free.
I love that.
Beautiful. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? And please mention what Sadhguru said. Sure.
Yeah. Hello. I just it's a pleasure to be here, and I just wanted to say in response to her question, kind of mention what Sadhguru says, which is kind of just reinforcing what Dr. Kulvi has said. But you know, he just talks about different types of memory, and the memory that's most influential in our lives is like the memory of your ancestors, or the memory that you carry in your body from past lives and stuff like that. And so his whole thing is basically just what you said, is that if you're driven by that memory, then like you just said, you're not free technically, because you're just going to live out and carry out the same thing that you've done for, you know, lives on end. And that it's just about being conscious and being the difference is consciousness, and the difference is being present and being aware, because then you're able to look at things exactly as they are in front of you in that moment, and then make a decision that's different. And you have all the power to do so, because you know you're aware of what you can and can't do, and the decisions that you can and can't make. And I guess really just your ability to think and choose and do what you want, you know. But we get so clouded, or so so clouded by our memory, quote unquote, that we usually don't come to a stop for long enough to be able to move. that choice. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. I appreciate young Santiago is his handle, Gabriel's his name, and I appreciate you because I found you because of all the positive, enlightening messages that you put out into the world.
Wow.
So thank you for your insight. Kulvi, any comments on, any more thoughts on that?
Oh, I think Emily has a question.
Oh,
Yeah.
Emily.
Yeah, just briefly, thank you so much for your share. Hopefully you can hear me. My internet's a little weird today. Okay. So I'm sitting with the word accumulation. So I'm thinking about accumulation in the realm of Ayurveda and accumulation in the realm of, I'm thinking like transgenerational transmission, like attachment style, which is epigenetics. You know, we're talking about that in epigenetics. So I'm so struck by just kind of what I'm sitting with is the accumulation of the wisdom of Ayurveda in very practical terms, the daily practices of Ayurveda and how they accumulate to support, just as the accumulation of generations of behavior serves to maybe support, maybe not, but certainly gives a container for a child when they're born. And that then helps to, sorry, my brain is a little blown. I'm also in a grad program, so please forgive me. But how that serves to, you know, like we're talking about free will a little bit, can put one on a trajectory to heal, maybe that transgenerational transmission, maybe through Ayurveda. I'm not talking about my own experience, of course. But it's very interesting, this idea of accumulation and these different types of accumulation. It's not it's not a conversation, but it's just what I'm sitting with. So I wanted to say thank you. It bridged some things in my brain so it was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
You just bridged some things in my brain too. So thank you. It's really interesting. Because many of these, when we talk about gene expression and epigenetics specifically, the way it looks under a microscope is that there is a molecule sitting on top of the DNA, and that molecule is called a methyl group. And the more of those you accumulate, the lower the expression of the gene. So a gene can be expressed at 0% all the way through to 100% fully expressed. And it's not that we want specific, it's not that it has to be on or off. We want genes to be imbalanced. We don't want it to be completely switched off or completely switched on, but it's the accumulation of those methyl groups that really downregulate a gene and switch them off. And the accumulation of methyl groups on a gene called the glucocorticoid receptor is one that is very well known to be present in individuals who've experienced childhood neglect. They accumulate these methyl groups on their glucocorticoid receptor, and we can measure the reduction of those methyl groups so that that gene can express itself more effectively. So it's a really beautiful word. Thank you very much.
It's so beautiful. And I think everyone here knows, but Emily's term accumulation is an Ayurvedic word. It's one of the stages of imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Kulvi's just said is pretty mind-blowing in terms of describing what Ayurveda teaches. Thank you. That's gorgeous. Any thoughts on that, Emily, what she just said?
I just have a lot of tingling in my body. It was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, we haven't heard from you, Jeffrey. I think it'd be wonderful to hear from you if you feel inspired. Lisa, too, do you have any questions or thoughts? We can click.
Thank you, Laura. I was waiting until everyone else had a chance to speak because I speak all the time. And I wanted to hear each one of you. I've learned so much, and it's really a pleasure to be with you all in such a wonderful mood of inquiry. It's deep and heartfelt, and the fact that I feel it as being conducted by the feminine divine, and I'm a big supporter of her renaissance in the world. So it's really a pleasure to join you and look at this from these angles. So I just want to share two things with everyone to reflect upon. The first is there are two small books that are the basis, pretty much, if you just chose to, of the Vedic civilization. One is the Bhagavad Gita, 701 verses, in a large epic called the Mahabharata, which is 100,000 verses. I'm grateful, as I'm sure you are, that there's a small book that I have to read. So sometimes I call that big book epic existentialism. It's a story big enough to contain all of us, but the solution is very small and isn't unapproachably difficult. The second book, and by the way, that's where worrier or warrior comes in. The story is about a warrior who used to be a warrior who's he's having a warrior moment in the midst of the environment. I could just say one thing to that. If you read the Bhagavad Gita carefully, it is suggesting that we do continue as an individual in some way that we can't quite imagine yet, and that our limitations are a limited definition of that individuality. So the oneness viewpoint is included in that because we are the same, we are unified, we are part of a great reality that is the same. But we do, in that instance, it suggests, remain individuals. Okay, so that was point one, just for your consideration. Point two is that the second book is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Okay, and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is also wonderfully brief and succinct. Both books require a little unpacking from a teacher, but once you get it, they're not that complicated. And all of those two books, both of them, have secret 4 verses or so that explain the whole book. In the Bhagavad Gita, the secret 4 verses that explain the whole book are chapter 10, verses 8, 9, 10, and 11. Those 4 verses are the secret of the Bhagavad Gita, so it's called the Nutshell Bhagavad Gita. There's the 701 verses, and then the nut is right there at the core of chapter 10, those 4 verses. The other thing that they do with Vedic texts is they make the first 4 verses of a book explain the whole book. And that's how it works with the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali. The first 4 verses start out, Atha Yoga Anushashanam. Now let's explain yoga the way it's been passed down. Then it says, Yogas Chit Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is untwisting all of the twisted departments of your being. Vritti is from vortex and it means to twist. You've heard the saying, don't get your knickers in a twist. Reincarnation is getting your knickers in a twist for the last 100 lifetimes. And yoga is untwisting your knickers. The next verse says, when you do that, if you untwist them, oh, by the way, the word vritti is in the middle of the word advertisement. Now you get it. That is twisting your knickers so you'll go buy what I want you to buy. Twisting them my way, without you know. So the next verse of the 4 of the Yoga Sutras says, Tada,
Yeah. Ta-da.
Drastu, Swarupe, Avastanam, And once you've removed the twists, it says, ta-da, like the actor does on stage. The magician goes, ta-da, and the gold jumps. That ta-da drastu means to see. Then, in that moment, when the vrittis aren't twisting us, we see sva ru pe, the true form of our immortal self, curled up and asleep inside of our being. And she wakes up, comes back. It doesn't say we disappear, but it's certain that the influence of the twistedness has disappeared so she can wake up. Some say this is the 7 dwarves for the 7 chakras and days of the week. And a young lady named Cinderella, wasn't that the story? And she eats the poison apple. Is she the one?
Sleeping Beauty. Yeah.
Thank you. Sleeping Beauty eats the poison apple. So Sleeping Beauty could be us sleeping in our glass coffin with the 7 days of the week watching over us. Grumpy, sleepy, whatever. And so, to be brief, the Bhagavad Gita calls this body the city of 9 gates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The 9 orifices or holes in the body act as the pathways in and out of the things needed by the city. Food comes in, garbage goes out, so on and so forth. But who are the residents? The many cells of the body. Now, to an epigeneticist like Kulvi, isn't that interesting, Kulvi? Because it appears there's been a coup d'etat, and the mayor of the city is no longer recognized as such. That would be us. Instead, the outer forces impinge upon the city and direct it, and the individual is no longer the mayor. The name for that mayor is Isha, is no longer in charge. So the Yoga Sutras is the manual that shows us how to take our city back, become the mayor, and then what you started with, the sound vibrations of the mantras tell the citizens of the city that the mayor is talking and unifies them around a single agenda beneficial for the good of all. And with that, I want to thank you for beautiful talk. Took notes all the way through. See, I talk too much, even if you ask me to talk a little.
Yeah. Thank you. I've just put the website for Jeffrey's new book. He's just on a not too much, never too much. Beautiful new translation of the Bhagavad Gita. So we did have a Veda talk. We kicked off a series of Veda talks with Jeffrey, which you can find on my website if you want more of that. And I'm conscious that people have probably to get back to work or to get on to their next positive experience that will transform their genetic expressions. But I do feel like we could go on and on. I think maybe what we could do maybe in the new year is put together, I'd love it maybe to put together a talk with Kulvi, with Jeffrey, maybe 1 or 2 others on free will. I think that might be an interesting subject to discuss and share and bounce ideas off of your great minds. But meanwhile, Kulvi, is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap?
I feel like I'm swimming in the beauty of Jeffrey's words right now. Actually, I never really thought of ourselves in the context of the Gita, and I'm that was very precious. Thank you. I'm really so deeply grateful to have been here with all of you today. Actually, it's really nice to have this kind of an experience to bring my cells into balance for today. It's very, very precious. I'm just very grateful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing ourselves into balance and for reminding us why it's so important. Yeah, let's giving you a big hug. You're just precious beyond precious. You really are an embodiment of the Divine Mother, and I'm so grateful to be able to hold that now forever in my heart, the imprint of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank
Beautiful, Jeffrey. Pranams to you. Thank you.
you.
And to you, Lisa, beautiful Lisa, and Gabrielle, and Emily, and others, Crix and Parva, who were here. Thank you. Have a beautiful week. Next week, by the way, come back because we're going to be talking Murtis and mythology with Manoj.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Kulvi, thank you. It was just heavenly. Really appreciate it.
So much. All of you.
Thank you, everyone.